Hey friends, it's Kevin again. I'm here to tell you about some cool books. Earlier this week, our friend Tom Phillips passed away. He produced this incredible book called A Humument that I just want to alert you to, because if you haven't encountered this book before, it's pretty spectacular. Upon hearing his passing away, I gave this thing a reread, and it's just as spectacular as any work of literature in the world, and it's a pretty monumental work of erasure poetry. What is erasure poetry, you ask? Well, that's what I'm here to tell you about. Inspired by this book as well, I kind of went through all my other books and found what I think are the best examples of erasure poetry. So I'm going to tell you about some very cool books of erasure and alert you to some cool things. So what's an erasure text? Basically, you take an original source text, so in Ronald Johnson's case, taking Paradise Lost, erasing, people will often physically erase, or they'll take felt pen and just redact things, like you'll see in those sheets. They'll redact them, so they'll completely cut out, but leave certain words, certain phrasing intact, and then the way those words relate to what's remaining on the page is your new text, is something that now you have written something new. Sort of similar to cut up text in a way, but kind of what makes erasure poetry its own thing is that it uses the way the text is placed on the page as part of the compositional structuring of it. So you don't change where things are on the page. You don't move them. It's where they are on the page is kind of where you're selecting as opposed to placing, if that makes sense. I'll show you an example here. Let's start off with, these are the two that I think are probably the most traditional of the erasure texts. Got Ronald Johnson's Radios, in which he takes the text of Paradise Lost and erases bits and pieces of it to create a new poem. So in this case, it's Radios. He erases bits and pieces of Paradise Lost, and it gives them the title Radios. Okay, so we've got Ronald Johnson's Radios. I don't even know if this is his most famous work. He has a kind of an epic poem collection called Arc, which I would highly recommend. It doesn't really have the crazy cachet that a lot of books of that stature should have, but recommend it. But anyways, Ronald Johnson's Radios. You can kind of see on the first page, this is really where he's kind of showing what's happening. So his text is in the dark black, and sort of the grayed out areas are the ones that have been erased. So yeah, working Paradise Lost. So I don't even think, he clearly didn't do the whole thing, but bits and pieces. Tail rind, the burning dark designs, how wind transports a hill, conceiving fire, sublimed the soil, celestial field. I think Radios is very successful in that it takes bits and pieces, or takes the pieces of Paradise Lost, but really updates it. That's kind of the thing about doing these erasure texts, is that even though you're using someone else's source text, you're still very much the author in your selection of the words of what remains and what doesn't. It reveals a lot about you as the writer. So Johnson in particular is very much speaking to a sort of 70s, sort of post-Vietnam, very much how art updates and the way in which he hopes it remains. So somewhat sticking to the themes of Paradise Lost, but even still, it's somewhat in his vernacular. So check that one out. And then we have Jen Bervin's Nets, in which she takes, not all of them, but a large chunk of Shakespeare's sonnets and erases them. Gives us Nets. So here's Jen Bervin's Nets. Taking Shakespeare's sonnets, so in this case, Sonnet 20. So as you can see, these poems are very minimal. They take Shakespeare's 14 lines and puts them into the most micro poems, often a single line, even maybe just a couple words. But they really illuminate something fresh, something new, and even in the choice of what Bervin selects, it's the curious thing is I always find these to be, when someone does these kind of texts, often they become about the act of writing, the act of art, even the shearing away. Like, these themes often just come straight out of the act of erasure. They'll even shear away bits and pieces to find remaining beauty. I also have a copy of John Safran Foer's Tree of Codes. Probably of these four, the least revelatory in their erasure. He uses Bruno Schulz's Streets of Crocodiles as his source text to erase. But in terms of an book object, an art object, this is absolutely beautiful. So Foer took bits and pieces, or he took the novel itself, and instead of doing erasure, he did a cutout book. And so as you can even see, like, the pages themselves are completely cut through. And I'll give you a close-up here. Okay, just look at this thing. These visual editions are so nice. So you can just think how they would have produced this is visual editions do such an incredible job. They always do these incredible book objects, and in this case, Foer's cutaway text, his active erasure, cutting away full paragraphs, leaving just the text. I feel this one is actually a little more difficult to read because you're never entirely sure what is on the page you're reading, in a sense, if that makes sense. Maybe that's one of my difficulties with this one. I think there's what makes it a little less successful, but in terms of art object, in terms of book object, this is one that I clearly had to have. So, and just an astounding object, even if the isn't as illuminatory as the other ones here, but the beautiful edition produced by Visual Editions. I don't even know if they're still making books. They're doing just graphic design work these days. But I've tried to track these down. The copy of Tristram Shandy that they did is my holy grail find that I'm looking for still. I missed it first time out, and now I'm hunting. So if you've got a copy, let me know. But anyways, very, very gorgeous object. And an absolute masterpiece, Tom Phillips, A Humument. The afterword in this is pretty good because he really illuminates exactly how he came across this. So he and a friend found a book entitled The Human Document by a guy named W.H. Mallock. So if you've never heard of it, no one else has either. That's kind of why he liked it, because it was a text that didn't really have a lot of, outside forces. It was all what his take on it. So he found this book in a antique store, bought it on a whim, and then for the remainder of his life, he worked and reworked this text into an erasure text. And for those of you who are kind of a little more interested in the visual arts outside of poetry, this will be for you as well. Works on many levels.
And here we have a Humument by Tom Phillips. This is the 2012 edition. Kind of the curious thing about Phillips is that, I think it even shows in the back here, but he spent a lot of time working and reworking the same page. So there's been multiple editions, multiple other pages. So if you find an earlier edition, you might have slightly different to what I have in this edition. But, I mean, that's kind of what was so interesting about it. So this was what became Tom Phillips's life work. He took this text, both erased, encircled, and, turned this book into a clearly an artwork. The curious thing about him in particular, something that was like you might have noticed that was a little different than these other erasure texts, is like largely they were kind of following in order, whereas the way Phillips treats this, he allowed it to kind of go in different directions. So he'll sometimes kind of go, he would allowed it to follow the rivers of these lines to the next passage to allow him to kind of go in different directions. So you can like read this chunk in this section and then read this chunk and this chunk in the directions he wanted to read. So but using the text itself, the way it was aligned on the page is what he was able to bring forth. So in terms of what Phillips has managed to extract from this text, a human document that he creates, a Humument, he creates this character, Bill Toge, that, largely he takes from the word together or all together. This character is interweaves through the text. So every time he encountered together, all together, this character, Bill Toge, would come forth on the page. So that's how his character. So really getting something completely fresh, hidden within the original text. So as you can see, he does a lot of different art techniques to treat these pages. Obviously pen and whiteout and white paint, but even just things like collaging, a lot of pen. There's even pages of typewritten work, which is very much a interest of mine. But, back to that page. Where was I? Just the way in which, obviously, this is a novel that's well over, 130 years or so. But in this case, like, this is an app, right? He's like talking about apps and Facebook and things like that. There's references to 9/11 and things like that. So things that clearly weren't in the text itself. Lots of things about 20th century tragedies, holocausts, and Hiroshima bombings and things like that. That, permeate this text. So obviously it's the author reading and writing within this text to bring forth the things that he's concerned with. Our 20th century world, the creation of art, the way in which we read, the way in which we read text, the way in which we read art. And even just as a slight tribute to a very cool work of art, I just wanted to tell you about this book and this technique. So there you go. There's 4 erasure texts that I think are pretty spectacular. I'd recommend them all for different reasons, but if you've never encountered a Humument in particular, recommended, suggested, it's spectacular. So, hope you enjoy your reading. Sorry I gave you more books to try to hunt down, but that's what we do.